My name is Louise Hyde. I'm a consultant at Turner & Townsend. Today's session is delivered by the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund scheme, and this is fully funded by the Department of Energy Security and Net Zero. Thank you very much. Please enjoy the session, and I will hand over to Julian.
Hi, everyone. Yes, as Louise said, I'm a principal consultant with Turner & Townsend. I've been involved with social housing retrofit for a number of years now. So hopefully you will find this session useful. So this is what we're going to be covering. It's obviously, this isn't a masterclass in purely PAS 2035. This is very much to do with how it relates to applications to SHDF funding for social housing retrofit. So I imagine most of you are from potential applicant organisations and really wanting to understand a bit more about the kind of implications and considerations around PAS 2035 with your projects and your applications. So basically, we're just going to run through the kind of PAS process, what it is, what it's, there's a lot of talk about, getting different people involved with PAS and how much it costs and this, that and the other. So we'll hopefully kind of make a few clarifications around that. And then implications of the latest version of PAS, PAS 2035. That's the 2023 update. It's actually a major update, it's a new version. Then just looking at risk assessment and primarily how that's changed with the new version, retrofit assessment, retrofit design, ventilation design, considerations around that, and then the TrustMark lodgment. So I'll carry on with this. So the PAS process. Yes, there's a few sort of misnomers about PAS. It stands for publicly available specification. People often refer to it as a standard. It isn't a standard. It's kind of as much kind of best practice and something that can be required of projects. So, for instance, the government funding for a number of different retrofit schemes requires you to follow PAS 2035. So it's giving you a methodology, basically, for how to do how to manage the risk of retrofit. If you can understand that. Basically, retrofit, it can be complex, and there are lots of risks around how it can potentially be suboptimal or go wrong, and what the implications of that can come out of that going not so well. So its purpose is to guide a holistic approach. So it's looking at the whole building, not just individual elements and saying, oh, we can do that to that and this to the roof and that to the walls. And it's kind of considering a whole system. And where the different elements and connect, so where the roofs and walls connect, where the wall junctions are, where the walls and floors connect, window openings, all those kind of areas where different elements meet, and how you need to deal with them when you're thinking about energy loss and heat loss, whether it's through the elements or through drafts or whatever. As I say, this can get very technical, but just bear in mind that it's kind of a quality process by which you can do a kind of lower risk retrofit because you're following PAS 2035. So in connection with this, you probably hear also talk about PAS 2030, and this is the this is kind of a sibling kind of specification, which governs the kind of installation of the measures. So on the one hand, you have the 2035 process, and then you have PAS 2030, which is really a specification for installers. So installers will need to have a certification for whatever measure they are installing, basically to say that they are a good quality and competent installer of that measure. So those are the two different sort of sides of PAS as it relates to retrofit. So also in the business case, you've got there, by conforming to PAS 2035, it's really addressing the long-term risks associated with retrofit. So that's something that's kind of de-risking the process and therefore making your project more attractive in terms of investment. On to the next slide. So these steps you can see on the left are basically the process. So you've got preliminary considerations. Inception, this is where a retrofit coordinator, who's probably one of the kind of roles that you've heard very frequently, basically within PAS, there are several different roles. Retrofit coordinator is kind of the key project manager of the retrofit process, and they need to kind of oversee as much of the project as possible from the beginning to the end. So it's from inception to delivery. So inception here we have the retrofit coordinator. Over the top we've got different types of project buildings, if you like, traditional and protected buildings. You might have this is where you need to have consideration for historic importance. High-rise buildings over 11 meters, again, you've got an additional set of requirements. Similarly with system build, and then there's further requirements over on the right, and this can be something that the retrofit coordinator would be considering are relevant or important for different projects. So moving further down, we have the retrofit assessment. Again, this is something that the retrofit coordinator will be key to organising, making sure that the assessment is done by someone who's properly qualified. The retrofit coordinator will put together the improvement option evaluation, which is basically looking at all the different retrofit improvements that could be made to any particular property. If you were going to do everything possible to it, but it's really thinking about what budgets allow for and what you can do in a particular stage. Agreements of intended outcomes, that's to do with the client, and obviously thinking about what the project requirements are. And obviously with the SHDF, we've had this EPC target and 90 kilowatt hour per square meter as an energy performance target. Medium-term improvement plan is really giving you the sort of stage by stage whole house retrofit if you are doing it in increments. So that is a requirement of PAS. Design and specification, this is down to the retrofit designer who's working with the assessment and with the retrofit coordinator and all the other intended outcomes. So they will be looking at the design of all the measures. Statutory approvals, so thinking about, different building regs, whatever the local planning requirements are, et cetera. Installation and quality control is again something where we were talking about PAS 2030, and this is what the retrofit coordinator again wants to ensure that the right qualifications are in place for installers. And then the test, commission and handover, that's that process where you finish the works, but actually the homeowner needs to understand what's happened and whether there are changes to the systems in the house that they need to be aware of. It might be that the heating system's been changed, or actually because you've changed the ventilation system, that you need to explain that actually, there might be continuous ventilation in the house. And the fact that it's on all the time is an important part of the retrofit process. You need to have a good handover process so that people understand things and don't think that, a fan running all the time, although it can be very quiet and certainly quieter than a lot of fridges or anything like that, People think that it's often think without proper explanation that that's wrong. They will unplug the fans. And then the final stage we've got down there is evaluation. That's really looking at the performance of the overall measures. And that might probably be done over, it could be the retrofit coordinator might be talking to the homeowner to make sure they understand how to use various systems, looking at energy bills to see if, what the kind of usage has been since the retrofit, and then doing maybe an inspection. It should be light touch unless there are any reasons to be concerned, in which case you would then require a bit more investigation as to why maybe you suspect that the retrofit isn't performing as it should. So the PAS process, this is sort of more of an explanation of who gets involved where. So just quickly we'll skim through this, going from the top. You've got that project inception. Retrofit coordinator gets involved as early as possible. These other roles, the retrofit assessor, which is generally now, with the latest version of PAS, the qualification is the same as a domestic energy advisor, a DEA. There was an additional qualification for the early versions of PAS, but that's now been dropped. Retrofit designer and the retrofit evaluator, that can be a number of different people, but quite often will be the retrofit coordinator. Going down to the dwelling assessment, looking particularly at ventilation, using that significance assessment there, BS 7913. That can be something that's required when you've got traditional predicted buildings. These obviously feed back into the process, where you would be generating the improvement options and evaluation and the medium-term improvement plan, then feeding into the design, and then you have that sort of process which relates to PAS 2030 installation. And then a potential feedback down at the bottom stage where you've got a monitoring and evaluation, which could require further action to fine-tune or replace any faulty components or correct any mistakes that might have been made, whatever. Okay, so implications. So the latest update for PAS 2035, actually I should mention there is a little bit of confusion sometimes. PAS 2035, obviously we're not talking about the date 2035 or the date 2030. They just happen to be the reference numbers that were assigned to these particular PAS documents, even though when you start talking about PAS 2035, 2023, it starts sounding a little bit confusing, but the 2035 is basically the risk management specification for domestic retrofit. Anyway, so just there's a few slides with a summary of changes, basically the updates that have been made between PAS 2035 previous versions, which was originally 2019 with various other iterative improvements, and then, as I say, the 2023 version is a kind of a new version. So we've got guidance clauses have been updated to reflect national policy changes and emphasise the role of PAS 2035 in terms of consumer protection. That's a kind of key point to stress. Just try to move my notes on here so I can see what I've written relating to this. Yeah, that's covering the same thing. The Department for Energy Security and Net Zero, DESNZ, as it's colloquially known, their retrofit technical guides are included as a reference, as references. These cover things such as room and roof insulation, solid floor and suspended floor insulation, internal wall insulation that relates to solid walls. So there's a number of published, they're not exhaustive, these guides. There's a handful of them, and they are, as I say, being included as references. There's a change of emphasis from a measures-based retrofit to whole dwelling retrofit as well. So next up, we've got contents of the medium-term improvement plan on our requirement. And this is the plan which, as I said before, gives you a sort of staged retrofit. Basically, the whole plan gives you all the measures that you could potentially do to improve the property, the energy performance of the property, in the right steps, in terms of what should be done first and last, and considerations as well to costs of carbon saving. So that's now a requirement. In the previous version, there were risk pathways A, B, and C. There was a sort of triage process which looked at various risk criteria, and it gave you different risk pathways. That has now been removed. It was understood to be too confusing for people, and there were sort of always grey areas about whether certain things, obviously people wanted it generally to be their project to be a lowest risk pathway. It was simpler and less costly. But anyway, so that's been taken out, and we'll come on to what is now the situation a little bit later. And improved guidance and requirements for climate resilience and adaptation as well. So, as I said, the medium-term improvement plan was basically a guide to staged or phased improvements. One thing to remember is that these plans should be updated regularly to respond to any changes in standards or availability of new technologies, or to record improvements as they're made. The risk assessment and risk management techniques should also be carried out in accordance with this is in the new PAS, it's accordance with BSEN IEC 31010. Basically the new PAS is available free, I should mention, from the BSI website. So if you go to the BSI website and search for PAS 2035 2023, there's a free download there, which again, you can refer to and delve into whatever areas you want to, and the references and the bibliography are all there for you to explore as well. So things like the risk assessment and risk management standard, all those references are in there. Again, further updates introduces a process whereby distressed replacement of heating appliances can retrospectively comply with PAS 2035. So what does that mean? It's basically when you have a boiler, it breaks down, it's the middle of winter, it can't be fixed, so you need to replace it urgently, but don't have time to get involved with your retrofit coordinator and start sorting out PAS compliance and retrofit assessment, etc., etc. This can basically be done retrospectively now, so it's not going to get in the way of having to replace equipment because it's this stuff breaks down. It might not, you might have various replacement campaigns that you're already running to replace boilers when they're 8 or 10 years old or something like that, but actually you are getting breakdowns on a kind of ad hoc basis, and you need to, if they can't be repaired, then they need to be replaced pretty rapidly. So basically this distress replacement allowance is basically there so you don't fall foul of any PAS requirement. The clauses to facilitate retrofit at scale are also included in the new PAS, and this is Really looking at the bigger projects. Generally, the kind of social housing projects are, considerable numbers of projects, and it's allowing the design to commence based on archetypes rather than having. So if you have an assessments done of, say, 6 or 7 different archetypes of properties in your stock that you want to retrofit, you can start working on those designs based on the archetypes, not on individual assessments. And also there's further clarification of the role of the retrofit coordinator in the PAS. So other things that have had changes made, clarification what happens in the PAS 2035 process if historic significance of a dwelling is identified. So that's really a case. This is the retrofit coordinator, as part of their assessment of the project, will be doing various searches through the local authority and planning to identify whether buildings are listed or in conservation areas or have various other kind of considerations that need to be looked at. Airtightness. This is basically referring to where there are fabric improvements proposed, and it requires that airtightness and air leakage strategy is required. It doesn't mean you have to have an airtightness target or actually do a test, but you do need to have a strategy if you're proposing to do measures which are likely to affect the airtightness of the fabric of the building. If you do happen to be setting a target for within your strategy, then you, in order to show compliance, you would need to do an air pressure test to demonstrate that you've met that target. So other changes, intermediate and advanced M&E relating to further evaluation and references to that BS standard. Basically, this is looking at an improved monitoring and evaluation plan relating to the medium-term improvement plan. So it's really looking to be a bit more robust about making sure that the improvements that you have specified actually have had the desired effect. So really you're getting the results you're paying for, and by implication the government has paid for through their grant funding, so they want to know that they're getting the carbon savings and the other social benefits relating to fuel poverty and reduce risk to health and environment from issues such as damp and mold. So that's another change. And then relating to that I just mentioned about the damp and mold, we've got the requirements and guidance around moisture in buildings. So that's another British standard being referred there. So with the new PAS, there is a transition period. So the existing PAS, a lot of projects are still being delivered to that specification, which is, as you can see down here, is PAS 2035 and PAS 2030, the installation specification. It's the original one was 2019, and then there was a supplement which basically gives it that rather long-winded reference. But this is still being projects still being delivered to this standard, and but after March the 30th, 2025, you can't start any projects based on the earlier version. You can still complete projects based on the earlier version, but everything after 31st of March 2025, which is starting, should be using the new version. And that also relates to installers as well. So installers who were qualified to deliver on 2030 PAS 2019 version of the PAS, and they are certified to that. In order to deliver the project to the latest version of the PAS, you need to be certified to the latest 2030 version. Okay, let's just have a look at the risk assessment changes there. So as I mentioned earlier, previously there was a risk assessment process with the earlier version which looked at 5 different criteria. These is around projects. These were around the number of dwellings in the projects, number of measures per dwelling, measures proposed, combination of measures. So within the PAS 2035 document, there is a thing called a measures interaction matrix. So it's basically an interesting graphic which shows you how different measures can impact on each other. It's a good kind of reference graphic just to sort of see if you're proposing, wall insulation and solid wall insulation, a cavity wall insulation. They can go together if you have a hard to fill cavity, but in general, if you have a standard cavity, you wouldn't be doing the two things together. And it kind of gives you an idea of how you can look at the way different measures may or may not interact with each other. So those are the 5 criteria I just explained. So combination measures, last one, sorry, was construction and build form. And those, can consist of various different traditional and non-traditional types, high rise, system build and that kind of thing. They all were elements of kind of thinking about the risk around the project. That process led to viewing a project following different risk pathways A, B, or C. And once those had been designated, then it gave you an idea of what kind of assessments and testing needed to be done for the projects. That was deemed to be too complex and too confusing for a lot of people, and so that's been changed. What we have now is a clearer definition of project requirements, standardized risk process. So basically all projects within the 2023 update now follow the risk path B process. And that basically involves a basic building assessment plus additional data to create an accurate RD, SAP, or PHP energy model. So you're kind of getting the same result, but without creating the confusion of whether a project could be A, B, or C. Basically, because if you had a multi-home project, some of those projects might be path A, some might be path C, some might be path B, and because of the rules of A, B, or C, it would say the whole lot had to be path C. So you're creating an awful lot of extra expense and cost and time where it wasn't necessary. So this process of going down the risk path B approach is designed to streamline that. This explains it a little bit better in terms of the graphic on the left there basically shows you the previous process, and the graphic on the right the process as required of the latest version. So on to retrofit assessment. So when are they done? Once the risk assessment has been completed, and the retrofit coordinator can basically organise a retrofit assessor to or assessors to survey all your different dwellings. So they typically don't need to be completed prior to funding application. You might well be looking at a sample of assessments just to understand if there are any underlying kind of problems with a building type. So as I said before, you can be looking at different archetypes, and those could be end of terrace, mid terrace, maisonettes, all sorts of different archetypes could be within your the project. But basically, you can look at the assessments on an archetype basis for an application. So who conducts the assessments? Retrofit assessor, I said, is a domestic energy assessor or retrofit coordinator. As I said, the retrofit assessor qualifications were a little bit more demanding on the previous version. You had to do an additional qualification. You basically had to be a domestic energy assessor and do an additional qualification. But the new version basically means that an existing domestic energy assessor, DEA, can carry out retrofit assessments with past 2035. So what's the process? What is the impact of them? It gives you an accurate picture of the current property condition. They're used to inform the retrofit design, obviously, and they can alter your assumptions about the likely measures that you would be introducing to those properties. Because once you go in and actually have a sort of on-site inspection, various details might be, kind of observed to be different to what you had assumed with your desktop information. Just to be clear about the domestic energy assessor role, if you're doing assessments to traditional buildings, and that could be, like I say, buildings in conservation areas, older design buildings, anything that's listed or whatever, they must also have the level 3 award in energy efficiency and retrofit of traditional buildings, or in Scotland or Wales, their equivalent. In terms of the retrofit coordinator, just to be clear about the qualification they need to hold, it's a level 5 diploma in retrofit coordination and risk management. And again, if they are doing assessments on traditional buildings, they need to have this level 3 award in energy efficiency and retrofit traditional buildings, as well as their diploma in retrofit coordination. So a lot of this is really trying to minimize the risk of the wrong kind of measures being introduced to buildings, and it just causes a lot of damage, risk to health of occupants, and expense down the line, which is what you can do if you're putting the wrong materials and the wrong kind of measures onto buildings, which change the way the building physics works and the way that moisture flows through the building. Generally, a lot of these risks are associated with the movement of moisture in buildings. It's to do with moisture in the walls, how it can escape, and it's to do with moisture internally and actually maintaining good quality good indoor air quality and being able to ventilate adequately to the way people are living and using the building. So coming on to retrofit design, here we're basically looking at what the retrofit coordinator really should be preparing a sort of summary report of improvement options, identifying recommended package of the appropriate energy efficiency measures, which go on to form the basis of the medium-term improvement plan, and that would be for each dwelling. The whole dwelling scope for improvement in energy efficiency for each dwelling should be identified, even if only limited improvements can be undertaken in the short term. So the medium-term improvement plan should be prepared, as I said before, for each dwelling. The retrofit coordinator will also identify any heritage significance, so listed buildings or conservation areas, to inform the design. There's another British standard relating to that, to the conservation of historic buildings, which again is referenced in the past 2035 document. And then just thinking about the air tightness strategy and ventilation assessments, basically you need to be, wherever you're having any measures which are impacting ventilation and air tightness on the building fabric, looking at additional ventilation for that dwelling. There are I'll come on to that a little bit later, actually. There's basically a few different circumstances which would obviously indicate that you need to be looking at redesigning the ventilation for different buildings. So this just gives an indication of which kind of roles would be appropriate for doing the retrofit design. So over on the lower right here, we have various qualifications of professionals who are working in different areas of the built environment, who could also do retrofit design work. Up here, this kind of graphic is illustrating where these different specialists could be doing the same role. This curious purple logo here is referring to a retrofit coordinator, where they can be doing design work for certain projects too. And the yellow castle logo here is for traditional buildings. So what do we need to include within the design for retrofit design? The design document should include the measure design, overall and site-specific construction details, ventilation design and strategy. As I said, this needs to be adequate for the dwelling, but also for the occupancy. Obviously, with an idea that, occupants can change, families can grow, people can, new children will arrive, children would leave. There's all sorts of different scenarios. Generally, you'll be looking at what the occupancy demand, is at the time of the retrofit, but with a view to, what other possibilities there are. If it's a 3 or 4 bed house, obviously the likelihood is it will generally be involved being habited with a family with several children, and washing and catering and bathing needs associated with that level of occupancy. And therefore the ventilation strategy needs to be able to cope with that. So the intended outcomes, you should be looking at setting out what the project hopes to achieve in terms of improved performance, and that could be the energy performance, so kilowatt hours per square meter per year, and EPC rating, such as the targets for SHEF funding. And how you achieve that could be different depending on the project and property designs and occupancies. And then another point about risk assessment, just defining project risk. And just a reminder that ventilation in building regs is a bit indicative. There's no hard targets in there, but generally with retrofit, we're always looking at installing ventilation systems which are above and beyond the requirements in the building regs part A, simply because of the retrofit work to properties where you're putting in energy efficient measures, whether it's lofts, solid walls, cavity walls, anything else. It tends to improve the air tightness of the building, so reducing the drafts and air leakage. And that's kind of, that, if you like, is background ventilation, which is already kind of dispersing moisture in the house. If you start reducing that a lot and significantly, then you end up with a buildup of moisture in the house. And you should be then obviously designing a ventilation system which is going to cope with that buildup and ventilate to an adequate level. This is the measures interaction matrix I mentioned earlier. It's probably not possible for you to see all the different text on that. It's quite small on my screen. This is in the PAS 2035 document, but it basically, all the measures along the top are the same measures along the diagonal. And it's basically sort of saying which ones are fine to install together, and the color coding you can see on the left there. They don't interact, so they're fine to install together. Yellow is they might connect physically, orange is they might interact other ways, and red is the incompatible ones. But quite a useful graphic to refer to. So just thinking about how do we arrive at particular designs. So when you're thinking about the design of different measures, whether it be if you've got loft insulation, obviously all lofts are not the same, and you have to make considerations about maintaining airflow in lofts, and there are different products around which can be used to help with that. There's obviously a lot of specification and installation instructions with different products, which must be adhered to in terms of the product manufacturer saying that their products need to be installed in a particular way in order to work properly. So those need to be adhered to. Same with different systems. So you might have an external wall insulation system, and the installers need to be trained in that system, both from a manufacturer's point of view and from the PAS 2030 perspective as well. And the retrofit coordinator is, as I said before, the overall project manager who needs to really be keeping an eye on all of this stuff so that products and systems are being installed according to the design and manufacturer's specifications. As we said or covered in a couple of slides earlier, the design needs to be produced by someone who has the appropriate qualifications for the retrofit design role. And as we said before, if there's higher risk, whether it's around the measure or the type of property, then you might well need a more qualified person to do the design work. So construction details are also very important with retrofit. So where you have corners where walls and roofs and windows and various other kind of elements join, it can be the detailing around those is where you are likely to have what's called a cold bridge, where there's a risk of increased heat loss at those places, and the insulation or detailing of the design of measures around those points needs to be carefully considered. It says there the junctions and sealing of different elements is critical. So the retrofit designer needs to be very aware of those requirements. Back to ventilation, why is it important? In all homes, there are pollutants being kind of produced, moisture included, but also VOCs, so volatile organic compounds from furniture, paints, carpets, all sorts of things. They all off-gas various different chemicals just from the way they're produced, and we're trying to avoid a buildup of those. Those aren't good for human health. And then high levels of moisture and damp in a property not only can lead to mold, but they can lead to various they can produce ideal conditions for mites and different kind of pests that you wouldn't want. So adequate ventilation reduces the risks from all these things. So when would we consider designing all the requirements for designing a new ventilation system? We'd look at the adequacy of the current ventilation system. So is it up to the job? Think about whether the works that we're doing are changing the air tightness, air permeability of that property. And we're considering long-term property objectives. as well, and the occupancy, current and potential future. There are obviously, if there isn't evidence of condensation or sorry, if there is evidence of condensation or mold already, then we need to be considering definitely some kind of ventilation solution. And that might be because there's no ventilation system present, or what is there is inadequate. It could be that there are no undercuts on internal doors, so allowing airflow through the property. If doors are very tight to carpets, particularly, they can stop airflow through the property, and it should really have a gap under doors of between 1 and 2 centimeters. Also, if you have rooms where there's no provision of purge ventilation, i.e. openable windows, call that purge ventilation, you can just open the window and have a very, very quick change of air by doing that. So if you can't open windows, then you will definitely need to be thinking about some kind of mechanical ventilation. So how might the ventilation strategy affect my project? So as I was saying earlier, any measures that change the air tightness of the property, the air permeability, will require some kind of certainly consideration of the ventilation and maybe some sort of solution. So examples of measures which will change the air tightness of the property are listed there. So external wall insulation, internal wall insulation. You're basically providing an extra layer on the walls, which will block up all sorts of tiny, maybe not so tiny, gaps in walls. New windows, so if you're refitting new double glazed or triple glazed windows, likely that the actual mounting of those windows within the wall or within the insulation layer, if you're doing some sort of solid wall insulation, will also have a very much sort of increased air tightness seal to the windows. Floor insulation, so if we're doing underfloor insulation, lifting floorboards or having them sealed from underneath, that will also massively affect the air permeability of a property. Generally, it's got suspended timber floors. So in those instances, it's likely that you require some kind of continuous ventilation in all wet rooms. So you'd have a continuous fan which runs at a background level all the time, and then when you have increased moisture and or carbon dioxide, they can have sensors built in which then ramp up the ventilation effect, the volume of air they're changing, while those moisture and CO2 levels might be raised, and they'll continue until the levels drop down to normal, to the background levels. Cavity wall insulation also affects the air permeability, and so there'd be probably a requirement for some sort of intermittent ventilation if you're doing cavity wall. So on to TrustMark lodgment. This is something that the retrofit coordinator again is really there to oversee and be responsible for. And here are basically some of the information that the lodgment data should include. So we're looking at documents relating to all the measures installed, including any guarantee information for products and systems. Certificates of compliance from the retrofit coordinator and the installers, copies of handover documents to clients and tenants, energy performance information, so energy improvement, before and after, modelled, etc. Any stock condition information as well, which might be coming out of the retrofit assessment. And then the intended outcomes are set out at the start of the project. So what the target improvement was at the start. There's a note just there on the right, just to mention that TrustMark have now updated the Retrofit portal. So, projects which are will be delivered to the new PAS can be registered. You can start projects now to the new PAS, but basically, as I mentioned before, the 30th of March cut-off date means in the project starting after that date need to only be going with the new version of PAS. But this kind of change over time now, you can start projects with the older version or the new version. But the TrustMark Retrofit portal has been updated to deal with projects on both of the specifications at the moment. And this just gives an indication of the process, key principles. So this is relating obviously just to the lodgment. So we got the Retrofit coordinator top left, creating the project within the data warehouse, and then you include the retrofit assessment. These are the documents you need to include. Retrofit assessor lodges the assessment, or the retrofit coordinator can create it if appropriate. The assessment needs to be accompanied with an RD SAP Excel data document. And before a project ID can be generated, certain requirements must be met. Defects in the property can be recorded at both assessment and mid-project. Designs must indicate who created them, which measures they cover, and what property and defects are addressed. Projects can then be completed and lodged in stages, and each lodge stage can contain one or more measure. And finally, to complete a project, an updated RDSAP XML must be provided. So that's kind of the pre and post sort of EPC, if you like. That's reduced data SAP is the data set that the EPCs use. And so you're looking at what changes you have made, and if you're aiming to meet EPCC from property performance of D or E or something else where your starting point is, then obviously that final EPC assessment will be showing compliance. And that is the last slide of the presentation. I do seem to have said the words PAS 2035 an awful lot. As I said, it's very much a best practice methodology, not a standard, but I suppose where it's being required as part of SHDF funding or anything, it's kind of being used in the same way. So